This video is about functions where there are more than one parameters in the function, or when the function is called, then there is more than one argument in the function. So let's look at this example where I want to find the area of three different rectangles. So I have the length and width of three different rectangles and I want to calculate the area. So when do we use functions? We use functions when we're repeating the same kind of code and it makes sense to then write that code as a function and then call that function three times. So you don't have to do all the calculations and all the printing three times. So, or as many times as you want to call that function. So I want to define a function area rectangle and call it on these three different rectangles whose length and width I know. And then when I run this program, after I've defined the function, then I want to see something like this. I want to see L colon 2.5, W colon the width, A colon the area for each of these rectangles. So let's start defining this function. So def name of function is area rectangle and it has two arguments, and so I'm going to call these parameters L and W, the length and the width. Now the reason why you saw when I started typing this and you saw that is because I've already defined this function before, and so it's showing me that. But if I had not defined it before, if I was doing this from scratch, you would not have seen that. So don't think that it always gives you a hint to the parameters. It's because I have defined this function before in this file, and that's the reason why. Okay, so now what do I want to do? I want to calculate the area in this function and I want to print it out. And so when I call this function three times, then it will also not only the function will calculate the area as well as print out a line like this. So I want to print, what do I want to print? I want to print L colon space. I'm going to use that new formatting that we learned in class last week. So I'll just write one big string and then I'll write the variables according to the formatting. So I'm going to print the length and then followed by the length written as a floating point, and then I want to print W colon, and then I want to print the width, the number as a floating point, and then I want to print A colon, and I want to print the area as a floating point, and that's it. And then because I'm using the formatting codes, I need to put a percent sign, and then for each one of my %fs I have to say which variable I need to print. So the first one is the length, the second one is the width, and the third one is the area, and you have to put that in parentheses. So that's the end of my function definition. So let's run this and see what happens. And I get exactly what I had shown you before. So let's understand this. It calculated the area for each of these three rectangles and it showed me the length, width and area after L colon and a W colon, right? And it showed it to me as a float, and you can see that even though I gave it the length as 2.5 and 6.7 as the width, it showed me 6 places after the decimal. And that is how the %f works. The %f formatting, because I didn't say how many places after the decimal, 2 places or 3 places, the default value is 6 places after the decimal. So do you all understand how this function call works? When we made this function call, what happened was this parameter L got the value 2.5 and the parameter W got the value 6.7. And then it did the assignment statement, it executed the body, so it did the first step in the body, the assignment statement, multiplied 2.5 by 6.7, stored that answer in area, and then it printed out the 2.5, the 6.7, because those are the values of L and W, and the area it just calculated according to the formatting in the print statement. And then it did the same thing for the second call and the third call. And notice, because the print formatting for each of these variables is %f, even when I gave it ints, when I gave length and the width were ints, L became 100 and W became a 5, and L and W are ints, and so this area would also be an int, because 100 times 5 without a decimal, without being floats, would still be an int. But then because the formatting says show it to me as a float, we see 6 places after the decimal. If I wanted to see only 2 places after the decimal, then I would say point to F over there. Okay, so this is how a function with more than one parameter works, right? You put a comma, and you put a comma between the parameters, and you put a comma between the arguments. So these are the parameters, which are variables, and they get their values from the arguments when the function is called. Now this is a good enough function which does the job. We give it a length and a width, and it prints the area. But it prints the area according to this format. Now what if so you are a programmer and some other programmer writes this function, maybe it's in a module and you want to use it, then you're stuck with this formatting for the output. It's always going to show up like this. So maybe you want to format your output in your own way. Depending on what the length and the width is, you may want to see 3 places after the decimal, or you may want to see it as a integer number. So you don't want your function to do the printing, you want to call the function and then do the printing. So you want to define this function differently. You don't want it to actually do the print, you just want it to do the calculation and give you the answer. So here is an example of a function where it won't do the printing for you. So let me show you this function, which I've already defined. So it's very similar to the previous version of area rectangle, except that it calculates the area, and then instead of printing it, it does this special command in Python, the return command, and it returns the area. Return means that it calculates the area in this assignment, and then it gives back this value to the function call. So the way you use a function that returns a value, and this is the first time you're seeing that, is as follows. So here are examples. So again, I want to calculate the area of these 3 rectangles. So I'll call the function area rectangle. But this time the function is not printing the area. I want to print it myself after I call the function. So the function call is the same as the return value. So when we call area rectangle, L becomes 2.5, W becomes 6.67, area becomes the 2.5 times 6.7, whatever that number is, and it returns that number back right here. So this is actually the value of area of the is 2.5 times 6.7. It's the return value of the function. That value is now assigned to a variable area1. So area1 is a new variable. Its value is the area of this rectangle. And then we can print area1. So how do we print area1? Again, we use the formatting that we learned. And this time we're not going to say L colon. We're going to use the word length colon, and I know that the length of this rectangle is 2.5, so I just wrote it in, width colon 6.7, area colon, and now I'm going to print this with 2 places after the decimal, because I know that my length and width is only 1 place after the decimal, so I want to see only 2 places after the decimal. Here's my second area rectangle. I'm calling it with 10.9765 and 1.4, so it will do the same thing. L will become this number and W will become 1.4. area will become the product. It will return that answer back over here. So after it finishes its job, it returns the return value. So this is now a number, which is the product of those two, which is the area of that rectangle. And now that is being assigned to a new variable, area 2. And then we're going to print area 2 with the formatting that we want. So length is 10.976, our width is 1.4. The area is now being printed, showing us 5 digits after the decimal. And then the same thing with the third call. Here the length and width are 105. These are ints. So we're going to print the area as an int. Area 3 will be the area of this rectangle, and then we print it. So if I run this, and then this is what I see. I see the first 3 lines of that first 3 function calls with the old version of area rectangle. This is the first version of area rectangle because the function was doing the printing for us. And then I see these 3 prints, which is calling the new version of area rectangle and then doing the printing. The area rectangle is only returning the area. So you can see that this area was printed with only 2 digits after the decimal. This was printed with 5 digits after the decimal, and this area was printed as an integer. So usually when you're defining a function that is doing some computation, you don't want to do the printing within the function. You want to let the calling program do the printing. What is a calling program? The code that calls the function should grab the value being returned. So this is the value being returned. The function call becomes a value returned when your function returns a value, and then that you assign it to a variable so you don't lose that return value, and then you use that however you want to use it, and maybe you want to print it using a certain format. So now we have a function that computes the area of a rectangle, but we can format it differently depending on how, each function call. So like I said, the preferred way is to return a value rather than to print a value. So this example shows you 2 different ways of defining a function which had 2 parameters or arguments.